Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World History. Today we'll be discussing the Hoosier Bills, Brain Trust, Franklin Roosevelt, and other historic topics. That's right, we will be talking about the Great Depression. The 1929 Great Depression was the longest and most severe economic depression ever experienced by the industrialized Western world. The Depression first began with the stock market crash in 1929, when the market opened 11% lower. Panic set in, and on Black Thursday, October 24th, a record 12,894,650,000 shares were traded. On Monday, however, the storm broke anew, and the market went into free fall. Black Monday was followed by Black Tuesday, October 29, in which stock prices collapsed completely, and over 16 million shares were traded on the New York Stock Exchange in a single day. Put all these shares together and you realize how much was lost. That's right, you get... Ooh, Mr. Green, I know. Okay, me from the past. Is it 21? No, me from the past. That's actually not even close. The correct answer is, in fact, that billions of dollars were lost, wiping out thousands of investors, and stock tickers ran hours behind because the machinery could not handle the tremendous volume of trading. Although the Depression was an economic catastrophe, the market crash of 1929 isn't exactly to blame for the start of the Depression. It's what happened after that caused events to spiral around until things got so bad that we couldn't afford a bar of soap. Events that were seen to be responsible for the creation of the Depression were the popularity of the factory and assembly line resulted in overproduction, large economic gap between the rich and the poor, there was a decrease in sales and overproduction, American families were in debt from installment plans and had little money remaining to consume goods. Also, the Hawley-Smoot tariff, which raised the tax on imports. Since Americans could not afford the high cost of international goods, foreign countries raised their tariffs on American products, causing fewer goods to be sold overseas and hurting the American economy. The fact that the Federal Reserve Board lowered its rates, which encouraged banks to make risky loans and misled business owners into thinking the economy was still expanding, while in fact it was declining. As the Depression worsened in the 1930s, causing severe hardships for millions of Americans, many looked to the federal government for assistance. When the government failed to provide relief, President Herbert Hoover was blamed for the intolerable economic and social conditions, and the shanty towns that cropped up across the nation became known as Hoovervilles. In 1924, Congress enacted a $1,000 bonus to be paid to veterans in 1945. In 1931, a bill was introduced in the White House that authorized early payment of the bonus. In 1932, the Bonus Army marched to Washington, D.C. to ask Congress to approve the legislation. After Hoover refused to meet with the Bonus Army and the Senate voted the new bonus bill down, some of the marchers left. Some marchers stayed, moving into deserted buildings in Washington, D.C. When Hoover ordered the buildings cleared, disputes between the remaining people and the police, and later the Army, resulted in several deaths. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation, also known as the RFC, was a government corporation in the United States that operated between 1932 and 1957, which provided financial support to state and local governments and made loans to banks, railroads, mortgage associations, and other businesses. President Franklin Roosevelt was, Mr. Green, like the greatest actor ever in the Knights of Museum.
I'm made of wax, Larry. What are you made of?
Actually, sorry, me from the past, that was Theodore Roosevelt, which is Franklin Roosevelt's fifth cousin. Nice try, though. Anyways, Franklin Roosevelt's presidential term was seen to be a very challenging term. So challenging, he organized a group of academic advisors called the Brain Trust that helped him during his 1932 presidential campaign. He went into presidency when unemployment was rising, bank runs were increasing, and people were converting their money into gold. He made up the first New Deal, which allowed for economic crisis to be solved. It was a time where Roosevelt sent 15 major acts that Congress didn't pass to help the economic crisis at the time. These programs made up the first New Deal. Advisors in the fields of academia, business, agriculture, government, law, and social work. Aspect of Roosevelt's New Deal was the change in the spirit of the American people. People became hopeful and optimistic, and their faith in America was restored. The effectiveness of the New Deal was questioned by right and left-wing politicians. First New Deal programs included the NRA, National Recovery Administration, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the Tennessee Valley Authority, Civilian Conservation Corps, Federal Emergency Relief Administration, Public Works Administration, and finally the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. These certain groups supported new nationalism of Theodore Roosevelt, distrusted big business and wanted government planners to run key parts of the economy, and finally supported the new freedom of Woodrow Wilson, and felt it was the government's responsibility to restore competition to the economy. The Emergency Banking Act of 1933 is a bill passed during the administration of U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt in reaction to the financially adverse conditions of the Great Depression. The measure, which called for a 4-hour mandatory shutdown of U.S. banks for inspections before they could be reopened, sought to reinstill investor confidence and stability in the banking system. Banks were only allowed to reopen once they were deemed financially sound. After some, we organized another deal, and if you guess its name... Oh, I know, Mr. Green. The first new deal? Oh, me from the past. I actually see where you're coming from this time. But once again, no. In fact, this New Deal was simply just called the Second New Deal. It included primary 4 more acts: Social Security Act, the Works Progress Administration, the Wagner Act, and finally, the Fair Labor Standards Act. Another way in which we attempted to help the Depression was the idea that the government needed to spend heavily during a recession to jumpstart the economy, which is known as Keynesian economics. In 1934, we created the Indian Recognition Act, which gave power to Native Americans as part of the Indian New Deal. The act worked to preserve and cherish Indian culture, rather than trying to assimilate Indians into American culture. It protected their right to the land they lived on and controlled. Our Secretary of Labor, Frances Perkins, was a great help during the Depression, and was the first woman appointed to the cabinet post. In 1936, the Butler v. U.S. case happened, which was a case in which the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that the processing taxes instituted under the 1933 Agricultural Adjustment Act were unconstitutional. Justice Owen Roberts argued that the tax was but a means to an unconstitutional end that violated the 10th Amendment. One of the last acts passed by Franklin Roosevelt was the Court Packing Plan, which increased the size of the Supreme Court and also brought in multiple new justices who would change the balance of opinion on the court. Court packing gave FDR control over the Supreme Court. And now for the mystery document. For this week's mystery document, Stan has actually prepared for me a photograph, not a letter. Now keep in fact, if I get this question wrong, I have a pen in my hand and I will click that pen and it'll shock me. Let me guess. Is it Dorothy Lang?
Yes, it is.
Thanks for watching this week's Crash Course History. I'll see you next week.